On this edition of the Just in Time podcast with Justin Kutcher.
I called on the NFL for 8 years, 32 times, 4 times a year, and got rejected. One time, I got to the point where I brought coffee and donuts to the receptionist. And I said, can't you get me inside to see somebody? And no, I'm sorry. Joe walks into our booth and he extends his hand. He says, hi, I'm Joe. I said, I know who you are, Joe. I was trying to sell somebody, and the fellow says to me, you're 25% higher in price than the other guy. Yeah, but we're authentic. We're on the field. No one knows you. I said, I'm telling you, it's worth it. Wouldn't buy my coat. He bought somebody else. He began to knead the guy's leg, and all you saw on the field was the jacket and the star. Now, what does that have to do with the retailer? Well, the next day, this retailer calls me up and says, yelling at me, I can't believe people are coming in and asking for the jacket with the star. I can't sell the other stuff. Will you sell me some merchandise? And he came up back all excited with a $25 million order from Foot Locker. And I remember saying, Tommy, don't be upset, but we can't take the order. He says, what do you mean? Tommy, we took that order, and God forbid something happened to Foot Locker, we could be out of business. I couldn't handle it.
The greatest sports moments happen in seconds, but the stories behind them are timeless. Dive into the mind of the icons who live those moments. No filters, just authentic conversations about the moments that define careers. I'm Justin Kutcher, and this is the Just in Time podcast.
Welcome to another episode of the Just in Time podcast with Justin Kutcher. I'm joined now by a guy who people might not know his name, but I promise you they know what he did. And he is the founder of Starter Clothing Company, the original Starter Clothing Company. He was a high school coach for my rival, Hamden Hall, and then Pinecrest. He coached Brandon Knight in high school, also in middle school. We'll talk about that. It is Mr. David Beckerman. David, thank you so much for joining me here. Can't wait to talk to you about this.
My pleasure.
I need to know, because I grew up in the age of starter clothing. And when I was in 7th grade, I went shopping at Bob's stores in Milford, Connecticut. My brother was home from college, and there was a starter Yankees jacket that I really wanted. And my dad was there, and he said, Just, if you want it, get it. I don't come shopping very often. Get it. I wore that jacket every day in 7th grade. I loved it. My 7th grade picture is me in that jacket. When you began Starter, why did you choose the name Starter?
Well, I think people remember one word. If you look at the great brands in the country, whether it be Ford or whether it be Heinz or Polo or whatever, people remember one word. And I always wanted to be a starter, not on the bench. So that's how it really came about.
I love it. I know you went from being in kind of retail to starting the company. You were working with a sporting goods store, and then you started your own company. What was the impetus? What did you see that was missing in the clothing area that you could break in?
What happened was sort of a fluke. Slow pitch softball was a big thing during those days. And I noticed that people were buying the best gloves, whether it be Rawlings and shoes and uniforms. But there was one item that was basically inexpensive. It was a windbreaker. Mm-hmm. And all the windbreakers were basically the same. They had elastic cuffs at the end. Well, the problem with that is if you had a big wrist, it cut your circulation off. If you had a small wrist, the wind would go through it. So, one of the guys was complaining. I said, well, that's easy. Just put a knit cuff on it. And, there's nowhere to be found. So I don't know. I said, you know what? I'll find out. And I went to a haberdashery store, bought some raw materials, went to a tailor, and I said, can you make this coat with, and I had bought some samples, and they copied the coat. And we put a knit cuff on it so that when you put your hand in, it just form-fitted and you didn't have any wind or anything else. That's how it really started.
That's amazing. And it's also so crazy because I feel like so many companies start with an idea that seems so simple. And yet you're always like, how did nobody think of that? So you do that. And at what point Or you're like, oh yeah, I could sell this. I can market this.
Well, what happened was after I made the sample, now I'm saying, you know what? You're right. I'm going to see if I could sell this thing. So I went to a variety of stores in Connecticut, and everybody liked it. And they asked me what the price was. And quite frankly, I had no idea. So I picked a price in between what all the competition was. And they said they like the product, they like the price, but they can't buy it from us. I said, why not? Well, because of fill-ins. I says, what do you mean fill-ins? I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
Well, you see, we do most of our stuff on bid. Coaches in schools, they go to a sporting goods store and they do things on bid. Because if you have a team, pick a basketball team, and if it's 15 players, or a football team, it's 30 players, and X graduate, you fill in, you want the same product. So that means you couldn't have half the team with knit cuff and half the team without the knit cuff. So here I am depressed to think everybody likes it, but then all of a sudden I can't sell it. So then I went back to one of the stores and I said, listen, how about if I give you an exclusive within a 20-mile radius so that when you put it on bid, you can make an extra margin because no one else will have it and I won't sell it to anybody in that area. They loved the idea, and that took it off.
So what was the store that you took it to give them the exclusive?
Hatfields, which was in New Britain. And now I have all the paperwork. I'm getting orders. See, in the business, everything is a 120-day cycle. What does that mean? It takes you approximately 190 days. It takes you approximately 90 days to buy the material and get it produced, and then so that for the spring, for example, they order in the fall, and in the spring they order and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So now I have the orders. I have no money. I have no manufacturers. And I, through a friend, I went to an attorney. Actually, I went to my family and everybody, but my mom and dad couldn't afford anything. And I ended up getting a fellow by the name of Ruby Vine, who owned a company called Railroad Salvage, and he co-signed a note for me, and that for $20,000, and I was off and running.
It's amazing because, first of all, obviously you remember everybody along the way, and the fact that that person gave you that chance. How old were you when you had to get that note signed?
30.
So you're starting a company at 30, and let's go back in time to your roots in growing up in New Haven. Was there an entrepreneurship in your family?
Not exactly. My father was an electrician in a factory. My mother worked in a bakery. Knew there were things that I saw or that I wanted, but I knew my parents couldn't afford it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess it was something instilled in me because my father had very good work ethic. He had 3 jobs, in fact. I remember later on, it always bothered me. He never came to see me play a ball game. And then I realized as I get older and a little bit more mature, here's a guy, 3 jobs, working in a factory, working at a hardware store, working at Crown Supermarket. And then I realized that here he's put food on the table. But what ended up happening was, in terms of entrepreneur, I shined shoes on Legion Avenue. I had a business selling flowers at the Yale football games. It was great because in those days, I would get mums and a little a pin, and I would sell them at corsages because in those days, Yale would fill up the bowl, 50, 60,000 people. And I would cost me maybe $1 between flowers and pins and sell for $5. So I guess I always had that. It was something that, in order for me to get what I wanted, I mean, I worked at Ensign's men's shop in high school. I never got a check. Never got a check. Always got credit because I bought clothes there.
Oh, okay.
So I guess I didn't know I was an entrepreneur. I knew that I had to work hard if there were things I wanted to have.
So a friend of mine, I don't know if you know the sporting, like the equipment called UCS. They do all the track and field stuff.
Mhm.
And it's a friend of mine in Charlotte. And it's funny because there's a similar story here where his grandfather was actually making laundry bags. And then all of a sudden he thought there might be a way to move into track and field. Why? I don't know. But his uncle for the 1984 Olympics, they went out and they met with the US track and field. And they said, "Do you guys make hurdles?" And he said, "Of course we do." They never made hurdles before. So he comes back and he's like, "Hey, we got to figure out how to make hurdles." And they figured out how to make hurdles in a couple of weeks' time. And they ended up going back to USA Track and Field and they got the bid for the Olympics. And that launched their company. And I just feel like all these companies, these stories are similar in the way that you just say yes, like you figured out a way. So what was the key for you to figure out when you got that note of 20,000, I figured out the way?
Well, I'll it's very personal. I somehow found a contractor in Waterbury who was making some of the things for me, and so I had a very small business. I was selling what we call institutional business. That means a red or a blue jacket, put a name on Hopkins or Hamden Hall on it. But looking back, and you're making me think now, looking back on it, and this is really strange when you look at it. I was going with Ruthanne at the time for it was over a year and a half, and we had scheduled to get married in the rabbi's study because we didn't have any money to do that.
Mhm.
And there was a fellow in the Midwest who I knew from trade shows. So I had tried, I called him and wrote him if he would consider taking on my line. I mean, I had no salesman or anything. And he called me and he said, "Look, David, I can't do it now, but I'll let you know." And about a month later, he called me and he said, "My guys are coming in. You got to come to the Toledo, Ohio. This is the day on Wednesday." Well, that was the day my wife and I were supposed to get married at the synagogue. So I had to go to Ruthanne and I said, "Ruthanne, I know you're going to think I'm crazy, but we got to change the date." And she was terrific. And she said, "Okay, if you think that, and I went out to Toledo and made a deal with Eddie, who was a fabulous pro. And he said to me, he had said to me, "Look, I'll take the line on, but you got to promise me that you won't take any other salesman for 6 months because I don't want to be in a situation where I book business and then you can't deliver and whatnot," which I did.
Mhm.
I remember getting in the car and I said to Ruthanne, "Here's my credit card. Please buy something for yourself. I really feel badly." And after having a meeting with Eddie and they agreed to take my line, I came home and I said, "Ruthanne, did you buy anything?" And she said, "Yeah, I did, but I brought it back." She said, "I felt guilty." She says, You didn't have to do that." And we got married a couple days later in the rabbi's study because, we couldn't afford anything. And she had worked for GE. And then about 3 weeks later, she had a convention in Chicago, and I had a meeting of the sales guys, and that was my honeymoon. I mean,
Wow.
it just sometimes it's the simple little things that really make a difference. I mean, I could
Eh,
tell you stories, you know.
That's what this is all about, the stories. I mean, I just feel like you got yourself a winner when she said, "Go do it. We'll push off the
Oh,
wedding."
I had 51 wonderful years with her. Unfortunately, she passed away 3
Yeah.
years ago from ovarian cancer, and yeah, she was special. She was special. Um, but Eddie helped me. We started selling. He had Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, and Kentucky was his territory, which are very good territories. And there were me, and we were selling stuff, and all of a sudden, I started getting, and most of my orders were 15, 20 pieces based on teams. And then one day I got an order for 250 pieces of a Navy jacket navy with red and white trim. And I asked the girl in my office, I said, who was this? And, oh, it's a premium order. So I let it go. And about 3 weeks later, I get another 250. I said, wait a second. This is way out of context. Where is it? It's in Boston. So I got in the car and I went up to Boston to a company called Twins Enterprises. Twins Enterprises is, and this is not an exaggeration, 20 feet from Fenway Park.
Oh,
They
wow.
literally are around. They own most of the property. It was called Twins. They were with Arthur and Henry DeAngelis, and they were sold soft goods. They were taking my jacket and putting the Red Sox logo on it. Well, I said, I can't be part of that. I don't want to get sued.
Right.
So they said, well, no, it's okay. We've been doing it for years, but we like the starter jacket. So I said, I'll get back to you. And that's when I went to New York to call on Major Baseball to see if I could get a license. Well, Major League Baseball didn't even have any licensing. They had given all the rights to LCA, which was Licensed Corporation of America, or Warner Brothers. So I went over there, and a fellow by the name of Ralph Arizari, he was a young guy, said, asked me some questions. Is you sure you want to do adult jackets? Because we don't think there's a market for that. There's only for kids. And we're selling Sears and whatnot. So I said, yeah, I do. And it's funny sometimes you say yes.
Mm-hmm.
He said, well, if you want a license, there's somebody else has it, Felco, but you can have it. It's $25,000. What do you mean? Explain that to me. Here, it's a minimum. You put up, we want 5% of the sales until you reach $25,000. Well, what happens if I don't? Well, if you sell one coat, you owe us $25,000. Or if you sell 100,000 coats, it's after you reach the 25. So I took the license. And I started. Then I got another license, but which was hockey. And of course, I went to football and they turned me down. And then, I was trying to go back and forth. And then one day, at my factory, I had two girls. There was a truck driver by the name of Tony Amendola, may he rest in peace. And Tony was always had a T-shirt with cigarettes rolled up his sleeves and tattoos, and had very, very foul language. And he would deliver raw materials to us. And one day he said to me, he said, David, can you give me a few jackets for the church? I said, sure. So I don't know, gave him a dozen coats. And he came back, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 weeks later. And he said, gee, they really like him. I'm embarrassed. Can you have a few more? So I gave him a few more. Comes back a third time and he says, sister wants to come see you. I said, sister? I said, look, Tony, I got rabbis, I got priests, I got people calling it. Here's a check for $500 for the church. Please, I don't want anybody coming. No, I can help you. I know people in baseball. And you got the license. I said, what are you talking about? I'm telling you, I can help you in baseball. Now, subsequently, I found out afterwards that on his vacation, and he got 8 weeks vacation, he would drive a truck for Adirondack Bat, that was the wooden bat company upstate New York, to spring training, and he would make bats for people.
Wow.
Okay, so I don't know this. I'm at the New York Coliseum. I have a booth that's maybe 8 by 10, maybe, and a table and a rack and whatever. And I hear commotion coming down, and 3 people are walking down the aisle. And Tony is in between these 2 people. And who are the 2 people? On the left of him is Billy Martin, who happened to be the manager of the New York Yankees. On the right of him is Joe Torre, the manager of the New York Mets. He turns around, Billy goes off to someplace, And I'm embarrassed because Tony screams out, "You greasy." I'm not going to say it on air. I'm saying, oh my God. And he's coming forward. Now people are following, and I have this little booth, and Joe walks into our booth and he extends his hand. He says, "Hi, I'm Joe." I said, "I know who you are, Joe." He says, "I want to thank you for helping Tony. He's been a friend for years. But I really want to thank you for helping my sister." I said, "Your sister? Who's your sister?" "Sister Anne Marie."
Oh my
The
gosh.
sister was the nun that I had helped without any knowledge whatsoever. So he said, "Is there anything I could do for you?" And I sort of thought very quickly on my feet. I said, "Will you and your staff wear our coats?" He says, "That's what you want?" "Yeah, sure." So I ran back to next day. We were going back to the show, to the office, and we made all our Met coats, and it had wool chenille on it. And inside we made it expressly for Joe Torre and everyone. Ran to New York, and I gave it to him. Now Joe would always have his foot on the step, and he'd always be like this. Well, all of a sudden, I'm getting publicity on TV with our Essence Star. People have no idea who we are, no idea the name of the company, but they'd walk into a store and say, "Can you get me the Yankee jacket with the Essence Star on it?" So all of a sudden, the business started growing. And Joe called me, like, I don't know, maybe it was 3 weeks later. He said, "Chuck Tanner's coming in, and they would you like to meet him and do the jackets for them?" And they were getting jackets, believe it or not, the Pittsburgh Pirates, from overseas. So
Oh,
I went there and I made coats for them, and that was the beginning. Um, and it was crazy. I mean, it was just unbelievable because I had no advertising budget, and the exposure was just unreal as we started. So at that, excuse me, at that time, now we have baseball, we have hockey. We had, maybe a couple, maybe 50 colleges. And I kept going back to football because football represented something that, from an outdoor perspective, is a fourth quarter sale, meaning September, October, November, December. And in that time, you have the World Series. In that time, you have a thing called Christmas, so, but I couldn't get it. I called on the NFL for 8 years, 32 times, 4 times a year, and got rejected. One time, um, I got to the point where I brought coffee and donuts to the receptionist. And I said, "Can't you get me inside to see somebody?" And "No, I'm sorry." And as I'm doing this fellow walks through the elevator, gets off the elevator, and sort of was a wise guy. And he says, "Where's my coffee?" And I said, "You get me inside, I'll get you all the coffee you want." And he said to me, "Well, here's my card." And it was John Bello, and he was the new executive director of the NFL licensing.
oh my
He
gosh.
didn't tell me that, so I let it go. And then 2 days later, I get a call from the guy I've been trying to see. And he said, "Can you come in?" And I said, "Sure." And he said, "But there's a consultant fee, $50,000. I says, "Okay." I'm thinking it's the minimum guarantee. And he said, "Fine, because I'm setting up a consultant fee." It's great. So I didn't think of it. I was so excited because now, having football, if I have football, baseball, and hockey, it's one-stop shopping.
Yep.
Well, I saw on my desk, my Rolodex, I saw the card from the original guy. So I thought I'd call him up to thank him because I figured he says, "What are you talking about?" "Consultant fees." So he said, I told him, and he said, "I'll call you back." Uh, Called me back in about, I think it was the next morning, and he said, "There's no consultant fee. You can come in to see me. Can you make a presentation?" I said, Sure. And it was really strange.
Yeah.
That fellow you wanted to see is no longer working here. Oh,
Whoa.
okay. I'm on a podcast. I'm not mentioning anything else. I made a presentation. They were really excited what we were doing because the jackets that we had made, in many cases, simulated the jersey. For example, the Bengals, we made it with tiger stripes in it.
Yep.
So now I had them all, and we were rocking. And it just started. The momentum was unbelievable. I remember when you mentioned the Yankee jacket. By the way, if you put it on YouTube, you can get maybe 10 times what you paid for it today.
Oh,
Because
I'm sure.
so then I remember getting a call from Mitchell Modell.
Yep. Modell Sporting
Well,
Goods.
he wanted to buy the coats. We hadn't opened him. And I said, Mitchell, I can't open you right now. Why not? I says, because I'm selling Herman's, I'm selling Paragon, I'm selling Foot Locker, I'm selling Champs, and I don't believe in saturating the market. But you got to be patient. Well, if you know Mitchell, he doesn't. He called Major League Baseball. Now I go to Major League Baseball for a meeting, and I have to explain to him why I'm not selling them because they care about royalties. But they agreed with me, not a problem. Well, Mitchell did something which is quite unusual. He went into Herman's and he bought 50 coats at full retail, which they were $100 a piece. 50 Met coats and 50 Yankee coats. Came back and put them in his store. He took a full page ad in the New York Post or one of the New York papers. Starter jackets, $49.99. Now I'm getting calls from all the retailers and saying to me, what are you doing? And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. So we go to a meeting and Mitchell, I'll never forget it, points his finger at me and he says, you're going to open me. And I'm seething.
I
So
would
the league
think
said,
so.
you got to open them up. And I did. I opened them up. So, and he, then maybe a couple days later, I get an order for 300 coats and I don't ship them right away. They didn't ship them right. And then I get a call. David, where are these coats? I said, they're coming. And the next day we shipped them. Now he calls me 2 days later. He says, David, I sent you an order for 300 pieces. You only shipped me the size smalls. I said, Mitchell, you can't see my finger, but you're going to play by my rules, not by your rules. And you can't discount this, that, and everything else. But that was part of the momentum of baseball. And then I got football, and it was just wild. And football, what ended up happening is at the time I didn't realize we created a whole new segment of the market. What happened was when Torre started wearing it and baseball starting wearing it, now I get football and we get Parcells to wear for the Giants. I meet with Belichick and I said, we want to put a coat on for you. But I want it to be a different color than Parcells. Parcells wearing a royal blue coat. You're going to be a red coat. Why? I want the defense to be able to see you when they're, and we did that. So then things started adding up. So we did, it got crazy. I mean, when I say it got crazy, I remember with the Raiders, we made a black coat. We made a silver coat. We made a special thing for Al Davis, and one thing led to another. And then we started doing things that what I call sort of the underground, because we started doing, and I believe in research, we started doing things with, I went to local high schools. I didn't go to Hopkins.
Right. I know.
Actually, I didn't go to I went to Hill House and Cross or whatever, and asking kids what they liked, what they didn't like, and colors. I mean, it just ranged. I remember Spike Lee calling when he wanted, he wore a Knick hat, but the Knick hat was only in one color, was a royal blue. So then we made him an orange one. Then we made him a black one. And people don't realize that in the inner city, and especially in the black community, they set the tone for um, a lot of styles. I mean, and as I said, it just grew and grew way, way beyond my wildest dreams.
I can't stop thinking about the sister that you helped out is Joe Torre's sister, and how that all comes together, and that basically launches
That's a
Starter.
catalyst, no question about it. But what the catalyst was, which I didn't know when we went to Parcells and when we went to getting people to wear it, is you have to understand in licensing, initially licensing was official. What does that mean? It means that when I had the license in baseball, for example, we had the rights to their logos, their colors, and that was it. So it wasn't authentic. But when we got on the field, we were authentic. We weren't official anymore. So now we started, and I started with a slogan, wear what the pros wear.
Mhm.
You know, Let me relate it to golf for a minute. You could be a 30 handicap or you could be a scratch golfer. But before you hit that ball, if you're playing the same ball as Tiger and the same equipment, you're authentic. And that was the real theme, and the underlying criteria was to connect the emotional bond between fan and the player, or fan and the team. Um, and it was just a natural. I mean, people gravitated to what we were making. It wasn't just a jacket. It had an emotional response. Your Yankee jacket had an emotional response. You felt part of it, and that's what we pushed more than anything.
For you, I know you're a big sports fan, and you grew up playing sports. When all of a sudden you've got Joe Torre coming up to you, and now Joe Torre's wearing your jacket, or Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick, they're wearing your jacket, they're wearing your clothes, and you're talking to these people. Spike Lee's calling you. Is there a pinch me moment? Like, wait, I'm a fan. Like, and now I'm with these people all the time.
It was overwhelming. I quite frankly, I never realized it. I'll tell you when I really realized it. One of the people that I really admired, and I know he was controversial, but I really admired Bobby Knight.
Me too.
And if you remember, Bobby Knight used to wear a sweater. He never
Yep.
wore a jacket and tie. And I was able to connect with him and he wore a starter sweater. And we obviously we paid him, which he never took the money. He gave the money to his assistants. A lot of
Mm.
people don't know that Bobby Knight bought a chair in Indiana. I think the chair may have been $3 to $5 million. I remember when he did something with a guy by the name of Landon Turner, who played for him. Landon Turner, in his senior year or going into his senior year, gets in an automobile accident. It becomes a paraplegic. And Knight called Red Auerbach. And Red Auerbach, he asked him to draft a kid in the 6th round. That's when they used to have. And
Yeah.
the Celtics drafted Landon Turner.
Wow.
It was the kind of thing that Knight did that a lot of people only thought about him throwing a chair or him doing that. But for me, he wore the starter jacket, the starter sweater, and it, it was for the real first time that I began to see and understand the symbolism, if you will, on what it was. And it was more than just a logo. It was a connection, an emotional response. And it was wild for me. I mean, it was just wild.
I've always asked friends who played, professional sports when they're walking around town and they see their jersey being worn by a kid or an adult, like, what's the feeling? What's the feeling like for you? What was the feeling like when you're walking around, whether it's New Haven or somewhere in Connecticut or New York City, and you see people with the starter logo on?
Uh, you know, for me, it was very proud. I was really very proud of the connection. My wife, God bless her, may she rest in peace. When we'd be in an airport someplace and she'd see it, she wouldn't say anything to them, of course. But I heard her. She would say, "Thank you, thank you." I used to get a kick out of that. Yeah, it really. I certainly don't want to say it was a cult, but it was really something that was very, very different than. Um, I mean, and then we had there was a period of time when we had some real problems with kids in California and the gangs and whatnot, and it was. I remember. Um, it bothered me so. I mean, a kid getting killed for a starter jacket. I mean, my God. So what we ended up doing in California is we came up with an idea. My guys thought I was nuts, but I said, it'll work. I'm telling you. We sponsored a basketball league that started at midnight. So they
Hmm.
played at midnight, and the idea was to get them off the streets.
Yeah.
Now it was till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, and they go back, and so I mean, there was a lot of things that started to us, not only individually. I mean, we had people. I will tell you this: there's still starter reunions today of some of our employees. I
Really?
never asked anybody to work overtime, never, and yet people stayed, whether it be a Sue Kasafi or a Billy Ananani or a Tommy White. I mean, people loved it, and they understood the emotional connection. I remember when my son Brad brought a group that he had worked with in Philadelphia called Boys to Men. They were in our office just singing a cappella. It was wild. I mean, so many things. I remember when Brad played football at the University of Florida, and I remember calling him and I said, "Brad, listen, there's a woman who works for us in Pensacola. I had a printing operation there. Very, very nice. And I believe it was her nephew, is being recruited by Florida. I want you to take the kid out to lunch, do whatever you have to do." He said, "Sure, Dad. What's his name?" Emmitt Smith.
What?
So Brad went to his wedding. I mean, they were very friendly. I could tell you, I mean, things happen when, uh, throughout the years, Brad wanted, Brad had never worked in our business. And then all of a sudden he graduates college. He was working for Marriott. He calls me up one day and he says, "Dad," he says, "can I come work for Starter?" I said, "Brad, you bring nothing but your name." So there was a sort of a pause. I said, "All right, you could come." So I called my friend Gary Adler, who had a chain of stores in Philadelphia. I said, "Would you hire him?" So Brad went to Philadelphia, worked for him for a year. I remember him calling me up. He says, "I'm ready." I "No, you're not. You're not ready. And now you got to go on the road." So I called Steve Seltzer, who was my rep in Philadelphia. And I said, "Would you take him on?" "Don't worry about it." Now he worked for Steve for a year. And then he was ready. And I wanted him to get experience.
Mm-hmm.
And he had befriended 3 people in Philly. One was Nate, who's the lead to Jeff of Boys to Men. One was Jazzy Jeff, who was
Will
Jeff
Smith.
Dowd, and a guy by the name of Will Smith. You just don't know. When I was on the circuit talking to colleges, when I was up at Syracuse talking or NYU, whatever, I'd always tell kids, never burn a bridge. You never know who can help you.
Yep.
And it's important. But today, it's a little different. It's just very different today.
S-
It's not the same.
Okay. So Boys to Men. Uh, I was just actually telling my wife, like, that was my junior high school days. Like, first, the slow dances, like end of the road. Like, I love Boys to Men, Motown Philly, all that kind of stuff. I mean, for my generation, they were the group. But then you have Will Smith, Emmitt Smith, like all the Jazzy Jeff, all these different relationships. What did those lead to? Like Emmitt Smith going to Florida, and then obviously his Hall of Fame career with the Cowboys. What did it mean that you had that personal connection with him through
Well,
Brad?
well, several things. First of all, Because we outfitted University of Florida's football team. That was number one. But for example, with Emmitt, when they were in the Super Bowl, we had made a hat called a spider hat, and we hadn't launched it yet. And we had an agreement with Emmitt, if you win, will you put it on? And as soon as they won, he put it right on national television. I don't have to tell you what the exposure is worth. But things started differently. We started basically with the underground. What does that mean? We went to people like Funk Master Flex.
Yes.
You know who Funk Master Flex is?
Yes.
Okay. Well, a lot of people couldn't fit him because he's a guy about 5'11", maybe 280. I don't know. We made coats for him. So we started in the music business, and then but just for exposure. And then we got into the movies. Eddie Murphy's played in Coming to America. And then Kevin Costner in Love of the Game. And all of a sudden, we're part of America. In fact, as we started selling overseas, we did Juventus, the soccer team, and we did a variety of different things. And Starter became the symbol of American sports. That's really what it was. And if you were a sports fan, so you asked me, what it be Will Smith or whether it be in the movies, or we were literally almost everywhere. We were part of the American culture. And it just, the momentum was created and went far beyond my wildest dreams.
Was there ever a moment, I mean, you kind of said it before, but where it was overwhelming because you started, you wanted to get to one place, and now it's growing and growing and growing. And like you said, you went to Juventus, you're going overseas now. And at what point are you like, oh my God, I can't breathe. I don't know what's next. Like, do I keep on building this?
Well, I'll give you an example. Tommy White, who was a great salesman for us, worked for, he had house accounts. And we didn't have many, but he had Foot Locker. And he came up back all excited with a $25 million order from Foot Locker. And I remember saying, Tommy, don't be upset, but we can't take the order. He says, what do you mean? I said, Tommy, if we took that order and God forbid something happened to Foot Locker, we could be out of business. I couldn't handle it. I said, maybe we could take $5 to $8 million, but we can't take 25. And Tommy was pushing me, and I said, I can't do it. I can't do it. I said, let me think about it. And the next day, I said, I don't know how I can do this. This thing is overwhelming. I went back to Tommy, and I said, Tommy, I have an idea. You go back to Foot Locker, and you tell them we want a piggyback LC. He says, what's a piggyback LC? I didn't even know what a piggyback. I just used the term. I said, they give us a letter of credit that I can take and I can give to the factory overseas so that I have no financial risk. The money is coming from Foot Locker, and I go back to them. We did, and it worked out fine. And, Foot Locker had 1,500 stores. So that's why, but that was a point when it became overwhelming. I mean, it just kept coming on and coming on. And it was really hard. The control was difficult. And at the same time, quite frankly, the league started getting greedy. And they didn't understand, the 5% royalty went to 8% royalty, went to 12% royalty. I had a marketing, I remember we were required, as the royalty rates went up, to spend $1 million with NFL. So I would take the $1 million and I would buy season tickets, variety of different places. So I give it to the salesman, signage in the stadiums. And then I get a call from one of the premier owners of the NFL. I'm not going to tell you his name, but he's somewhere in the West. And he says, would you come meet with me? And I flew down to Dallas, and I said to him, because we were going to outfit the team and Emmitt and whatever. And, well, he wanted his own expenditure. And I remember saying, look, I can't, if I do one for one team, I can't do it for the rest of the teams. I have to do it. And he wasn't happy with me, and we went on. So problems became as a result of success.
Mm-hmm.
I remember in Philadelphia, they had changed their colors. The new owners came in. They changed the colors from Kelly green to a different color green. Well, we're making the uniforms to the Eagles, and the lineman jerseys are different than a running back's jerseys. And the materials, lycra, whatever, you can't mix things exactly the same. I mean, I had to go back, and I remember them yelling, saying, listen, guys, we want this is the color we want. And it all has to match. Impossible. You can't take lycra and nylon and make it exactly, the dye won't. I had to talk to the leagues, and the leagues turned around and settled it. I mean, just saying to you,
Wow.
success caused decision process. The success had problems, and it obviously had good things, but you deal with it. You just deal with it. You can't bury it. And there were some things that I did that didn't work out. But at the end of the day, they did.
Before I get into the next career move for you, I need to know, do you still talk to Joe Torre to this day?
Well, if I see him, I don't call him up and um,
Like during the whole Yankees run, 96, when he took over and they get to the World Series.
you know what?
You're not at that point. Yeah, the starter's still in the game there.
Yeah, I was very respectful for who all these celebrities were. I always wanted to be on the sidelines, never wanted to do anything. Although, having said that, I'll tell you something. One of the things, and you can relate to this from that I really enjoyed. Recently, I just was given an honor. I was 30 years on the Basketball Hall of Fame and a lifetime member, which I enjoyed. But one of the things is that they helped me. We did clinics across the country, getting kids that we sponsored for free, excuse me, would come. And I had Coach K, and I had Calhoun, and I had Bob. That's how I met Bobby Knight. So respectfully, you had to be with them. You couldn't. I didn't want to be a fan. I wanted to just be respectful.
Yep.
So I calling people, I never did any of that. Yes, I sent a holiday card, or if they needed something for their family or something, fine, but nothing other than that.
Yeah, I mean,
It was fun. That was the other issue. It was really, really fun.
That's what I was thinking about when you talked about, a certain owner or the leagues that they want more royalties and more royalties. All of a sudden, all that fun, that ride, that journey to get to here, the fun gets taken out of it.
It's about greed, Just. It's really about greed. I went to the NFL, for example, and offered them $250 million, $25 million a year for a 10-year contract, and said, I don't care if you have another competitor. All right? It's not an exclusive, just me and pick somebody else. They said no. Subsequently, 3 years later or 4 years later, they did a deal with Reebok as an exclusive and a big deal. It failed. Then they did one, I guess, with Nike. What they didn't understand was we were piggyback our logo and our brand on another brand. We were selling their brand, whereas Reebok wanted to sell shoes first, and Nikes. So they use it as an instrument for exposure. And, we had a different philosophy. I was very happy what we were doing. I had no problem sharing the exposure. It was great for both of us, but In the end, it's all about how much money you can pay. It's really doesn't make sense, but that's what they did.
But you stayed in your lane because I think about like Under Armour. Under Armour started off clothing and they were great. And then they wanted to compete with Nike. And they're like, we have to make shoes. They could never make shoes to compete with Nike. You never went into that area.
I
You
had a
stayed in your
chance
lane.
to, but I said, it's just not our wheelhouse. It's not something that I want to do, and I want to stay right in our lane, what we're doing.
So after the fun is taken out, I feel like you were given a new side of fun when you became a basketball coach at Hamden Hall, which is the rival to my high school, Hopkins, which we've already talked about. We've mentioned it. What was it for you that you wanted to get back in to coaching kids, high school kids, and making a difference?
Um, well, look. First of all, I like being around young people, and coaching to me was something that I was not a starter in high school. Okay, so uh, I was a pretty decent offensive player. I couldn't play defense. I was slow as a little, So it was fun. I mean, I started coaching at the Jewish Center in 1979. We won a national championship, and I mean a national championship. We beat Baltimore, we beat Atlanta, uh, we beat Washington D.C., and I was named one of the coaches of the United States Maccabea team in Mexico City. And I came back, and then I got a call from, I think it was Marty Anastasio, who asked me, he said, look, Hamden Hall needs a coach. Would you like to coach them? And I said, well, I can't. I got, work. I mean, no, we can arrange. You can do it at 4:00 or whatever. And so I said, why not? And so I went to Hamden Hall and with a private school. And the success we had was way beyond my wildest dreams. I mean, we won 8 New England championships, 6 in a row. I mean,
Trust
and
me,
we
I
beat
know.
Hopkins.
I know. We got
Uh,
you back one time, my last game in my senior year.
well, as I said, so being around young people really helped the flavor uh, in terms of starter and it, the dialogue and the words and the sayings and how they wore things, the long pants versus the short pants, the hat backwards. I mean, all of that was uh, part of the process of being connected to them, but it also helped me understand the other side, so to speak, as it relates to the fashion end.
So I can say this that I still have them to this day. UConn was also starter, and I had the official starter UConn shorts, which I wore every day for basketball practice in high school. I mean, I don't know if I washed them at all, which is really gross. But when you went to Hamden Hall and you outfitted Hamden Hall with starter uniforms and warm ups, all of us were so jealous. We're like, man, those are unbelievable.
Yeah, it was kind of crazy because I remember we had done a black uniform and their colors were green, white, and a little black trim. Well, we made home and away and we made up, and then it started. We started doing it all over the country. I mean, black Georgetown uniforms. It was wild. It was just wild.
So
I
Hamden
mean,
Hall was almost like a test, like
yes,
for
yes.
you. Wow.
I mean, you talk about things, and I hadn't even thought about it until this minute. For example, I mentioned Georgetown. I refereed a game in the New York Coliseum, in the New Haven Coliseum with Tony Amendola and there was one other person, Wilbur Cross, against a team from Boston who had a center by the name of Pat Ewing.
Are you serious?
Wow. So
And Mike
you
Jarvis
just
was the
don't
head
know.
coach.
Huh?
And Mike Jarvis was his coach.
Yes. Things connect. That's why you never burn a bridge. Things connect in life. if you do the right thing. And that's the key thing. You got to do the right thing. You got to be honest. You got to be consistent and sincere. And I know that sounds silly, but it's really the truth. I think the toughest thing in life, the toughest thing in business, is a very simple motto. And I told these kids, what is that? Do what you say you're going to do. What do you mean, do what you say you're going to do? I remember in the beginning at Hamden Hall, coaching the kids, I gave them a 3x5 card at practice. We're going to play Hopkins tomorrow. Here's your 3x5 card. Please tell me what you're going to do. What do you mean? Well, I would say to Casey Hughes, well, tell me. Well, how many rebounds you going to get? How many points you going to get? Are you going to hold your man? Well, they wrote it down, and then after the game, the next day at practice, we compared them. I said, you didn't do what you say you're going to do. And it was just, it was my way of penetrating the thought process that they really have to be committed to doing something. When I had Brandon Knight at Pinecrest, we would do these drills. I had to do special drills for him. He was so better than everybody else. In the 8th grade, I had a fellow by the name of Greg Horrenda, who ended up coaching. He was a coach at Yale for a while, assistant, and then he was head coach at Fairleigh Dickinson. And in fact, I think he's now doing what you're doing.
Oh, okay.
And I said, you got to come down and see this kid. And he came down. I said, but you do a clinic, and he did a clinic. And he called George Blaney.
Yeah.
At UConn.
At UConn.
And this kid is special. I think Brandon wanted to go to UConn. He always admired, and I remember going up to UConn and I brought Brandon up there and Calhoun in the interview, and I remember his dad asking, what is UConn going to do for us? And we're a state school. This is what we could do. And of course, he ended up going to Kentucky.
Yep.
I mean, you remember the movie Who Got Game?
Yeah, he got game.
Okay. In the gym, going into his senior year, I had Calhoun, I had Jim Boeheim, Thad Matta, of course, Billy Donovan, and Calipari, all looking at him in one. It was magic. It was just magic.
I can remember you telling me, you're like, hey, I've got this kid. He's in 8th grade. He's different. And again, you talk about how things connect. I ended up calling your game, Pinecrest, on ESPN with Brandon Knight against Austin Rivers.
Wait a minute. He also had 3 other kids who were Division I players on that team.
He did. Yes. No, but like those 2 guys went off in the game. And I just thought it was, here we are coming full circle. You coached against me when you were at Hamden Hall. I was at Hopkins. And now, I'm getting a chance to broadcast you as a coach. Brandon Knight is playing, the kid that you've been telling me about for a few years now.
Yeah, and then he goes 45 on that game.
Yeah, like I said, they both went off that game. It was so much fun, but I don't know if I ever told you this. One of my great regrets is after my sophomore year, you said to me at the golf course, you go, Justin, I don't recruit, but if you'd like to come to Hamden Hall, I'd love to coach you. And when you said that to me, that all of a sudden like triggered something. And I remember speaking to my dad about it. Should I transfer? Should I go to Hamden Hall? My brother went to Hopkins. My older sister went to Hamden Hall. I was at Hopkins. My younger sister at Hamden Hall. And to this day, I wish I had transferred.
Wow.
And you had a point guard, Keith Kalazewski.
Yes, I did.
And we would butt heads, he and I. But I couldn't do it because, like, for people who are listening right now or watching, Hamden Hall UConn, Hamden Hall Hopkins is like Duke Carolina. So imagine somebody transferring from one to the other. Like that's the way that I envisioned it.
It's funny you mentioned about, I told you I don't recruit. I really, and I know it's a play on words, I never really recruited a kid. I always would try to encourage a kid or a family to take advantage of an opportunity. I know it's sort of a thin line, but that's what I did. And
Mhm.
people would say to me, "Oh, how do you do that?" And, I sort of had an underground. I talked to a policeman, I talked to a minister, I talked to people within the community and tell me about their families. Tell me about, look, you can always get good players if you're willing to, but I'm not willing to do certain things. To me, it was about giving a kid, especially a kid in the inner city, an opportunity to get an education. Um, I still hear from a lot of the kids. Every year I have a reunion of Hamden Hall kids. They come to my house in Connecticut during the summertime. Danny Oglesby, Lee, Eric Boast, Carl Bond.
Oh
And then every
gosh,
year I
these are
have
names that
one
are
down
coming
in
back right
Florida.
now.
Down in Florida, we have a reunion of Pinecrest kids. We just finished having it the day after Thanksgiving. Brandon comes, everybody comes. It's the relationships, it's the bond, it's the emotional bond between, I guess, coach and player. It's the same thing between jacket and fan.
Mhm.
It's no different. And at the end of the day, it's you want to be able to do things that it's right. That's one of the things my parents always taught me. You do the right thing, and all my life I try to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, and starter was something that was, as I said, I don't know. We ended up at $500 million with the business. It was just so far beyond my wildest dreams. But today, it's uh, it, it's a little different.
Yep.
It's not the same product. It's not the same distribution, but it's the same brand.
I like to end all my podcasts with a segment I call This Just In. So it's kind of rapid fire questions where you can answer, take as long as you want, and I might follow up with a question. But the moment you realized that you had something real with Starter,
Well, the first was when I hired Eddie Bushel and I delayed my wedding. That was, I knew I had starter. But when I signed Joe, when we did the Mets, um, and then we did Parcells when I got the NFL, all of a sudden I realized we were more than an official. We were authentic. We were different than everybody else. That made a significant difference, and that was the catalyst to getting exposure. All of a sudden, we're getting calls from movie houses or from uh, rock groups, Run DMC and this one and that one, because they wanted the authentic product. So I knew that's when I really started knowing what was going on.
yeah, you kind of mentioned it before, but the athlete or coach who, when they wore it, maybe without asking you, but they just wore it, and you go, wow, I can't believe this person's wearing it.
It was crazy. I mean, when I say a word, let me tell you one quick story that
Please.
it, it the St. Louis Cardinals are playing the Kansas City Royals in the World Series.
1985.
I had flown to Kansas City. No, St. Louis, excuse me. St. Louis. And I was trying to sell somebody, and the fellow says to me, David, you're 25% higher in price than the other guy. Yeah, but we're authentic. We're on the field. No one knows you. I said, I'm telling you, it's worth it. Wouldn't buy my coat. He bought somebody else, the other guy, who wasn't authentic, who was official. The pitcher was, I'll never forget it, was Angular Aguilar, I think his name was, something like that.
Andujar Aguilar.
He gets hit with a line drive, falls down, World Series. Trainers come out. Now, everybody's in uniform, except the trainer was in a starter jacket. And he began to knead the guy's leg. And all you saw on the field was the jacket and the star. Now, what does that have to do with the retailer? Well, the next day, this retailer calls me up and says, yelling at me, I can't believe people are coming in and asking for the jacket with the star. I can't sell the other stuff. Will you sell me some merchandise? So it's all connected. And, the Essence Star, the philosophy that my dad taught me in terms of working hard, the emotional connection, coaching at the center, the Hamden Hall uniform, all of that is all connected. And I believe in life that's if you do the right thing, that you do get connected.
This is going to be really weird, but my guest last week on the podcast was Mark Gubiza. Mark Gubiza was on the 1985 Kansas City Royals team that beat the St. Louis Cardinals in that World Series.
We outfitted both teams. And a friend of mine who owned, when I say a friend, today he's a friend, by the name of Fogelman, owned the Kansas City Royals, lives here in Florida where I do.
No.
And he was was a big contributor to Tulane and Memphis, where he was originally from. So it's all connected.
It's all connected.
Everything's connected one way or another.
Wow. Okay. How about we talk about your coaching career, the best player that you ever coached against?
Was a kid. We flew out to Ohio to a showcase. Brandon, we played against a kid who played for Michigan State, a big kid. I can't think of his name. He's about 6'10". He'll come to me in a minute. He was one, and certainly Rivers was very good.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, come on, he was great. Kenny Boynton at which he played for Florida for 4 years, was a major rival of Brandon. There were so many kids that were really good. I don't really know.
You named some good ones. I mean, those are pretty good. And I remember that game against Austin Rivers. It was just back and forth. Those two guys were putting on a show.
Do you remember a little kid who dunked the ball? I don't know. He was only the other eighth grader that I had. His name was Travion Henry, who
Yes.
I brought up to Yale in his senior year, and Coach Jones wanted him, but he ended up going to Northwestern, made all Big Ten football, but he could have played basketball. He was a great athlete too. I was blessed. We had some great athletes. Look, Eddie Waite, who played for me and played with Brandon at Pinecrest, broke all of Michael Irving's records as a tight end.
Really?
He was a great athlete.
At Miami?
In high school. In high school.
Oh, okay.
As I said, I was very fortunate. Always had one kid who was a great athlete, and we sort of connected them with other kids. Hamden Hall didn't have a lot of great players. We just played together. Zach King. I don't remember
Zach King. Zach King was the first one to really kind of, from a Hopkins perspective, that changed Hamden Hall. Like Zach King was the one where all of a sudden you saw that flip.
Yeah, Zach King came in with Avery Esdale. And the two of them, Zach ended up being a lieutenant commander in the Navy.
Wow.
I speak to him every once. He and his two sons came up to visit me last summer, spent a weekend with us. You make me think about it. I would tell you the thing that I'm most proud of. I've been to 10 weddings. 10 weddings. If you think about it, these are high school kids. They go to college and they remember their high school coach. I'm going to my 11th is going to be this summer. That's probably the most thing. Not all the championships, Pine Terrace, we won 3 state championships that they had never won ever before, Hamden Hall. But the relationships that I have with the kids, to me, is more important than the trophies or anything else.
Well, that leads me into this one because I have a story behind it. How many hole-in-ones do you have in your life?
1.
Okay. It was at Woodbridge Country Club.
Yes.
Yep. And I
Don't
was
tell me you
there.
were the caddy.
No, but I was there that day, and I remember this. So here I am. I think I was in high school or whatnot. And I remember seeing you after your round, and you're like, I had a hole in one. I had a hole in one. And you were so excited because you won $20. And that's what stayed with me for all these years is that I was like, here is Mr. Beckerman with starter. And I was like, he just had a hole in one and he's excited because he just won $20. And it just said to me that you stayed grounded all those years. And so
It
your
wasn't the
relationship.
$20, is that I beat the other team in a match. Oh, God. I think, in fact, I'm not even sure if it was that time or whatever. Casey Hughes used to caddy for us.
Did he really?
Yep. We had, look, I had to get, some of these kids we gave jobs to. Some of these kids, they caddied. That's what you're supposed to do in life, help each other.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, heck, it's what you've done for me, and it's
No.
why you did this. And
You're a professional. You did it on your own.
well, I still have a letter that you sent years ago to Billy Packer on my behalf, and it's such a small world. You say how things come full circle. One of his sons was one of my producers at Golf Channel a couple of years ago. So
Billy was a good guy. I liked him a lot. He supported me when we were at the Basketball Hall of Fame. I said, this place has got to be renovated. We need to build a new. And Billy, and there was a guy by the name of Bob Curlin who played in the Olympics. They all agree. I had Jerry Kagan, my architect. We did a whole design. And today they built what you see today is a result of that meeting.
Wow. Well, the stories are amazing. The fact that Boys to Men was in your office, I mean, Motown Philly, it's so cool to think about what you accomplished in your life, where you started, and the differences in so many people's lives that you've made. I know that's the part that you cherish the most. But I know a lot of people who watch this episode, who listen to this episode, will think back to their childhood and think about Starter and what a difference it was. And you said it was a movement. It wasn't just a brand.
And it was fun. It was really fun.
Yeah. Well, this was really fun. I know I used to always call you Mr. Beckerman, and you said,
please
it's
don't.
David. It's David or Coach B.
David
So
or Coach B, either one.
Yeah. All I can say is thank you.
Well, thank you.
We talk about Judaism a lot, and people describe you as a mensch, and that's what you are. So thank you for doing this. Thank you for being you, and congratulations on everything. And thank you for sharing your story here, because this was a lot of stuff that I did not know about.
Well, that's why the only thing that I agreed to do is the book, because really for the family, that's really what it is. People had asked me, well, can we go buy it? And I said, no, I'm not selling a book to make money. We're doing it for charity and whatever. But other than that, look, my life has been very fortunate. And all I can say is it's been great, and I've enjoyed every minute of it.
I love it. Well, make sure you get that second hole-in-one sometime soon, okay?
I wish you only continued success.
Thank you. I appreciate it more than you know. Thank you so much.
Be well.
Be in touch.
Bye-bye.
Bye.